92nd Street Y online media is made possible by the generous support of the Aoriflex Foundation and by listeners like you. This program, part of the Dave Nolan Poetry Series, features poet John Ashbery reading from his work. It was recorded on April 3rd, 1952, before a live audience at New York's 92nd Street Y.
Eclogue. This is a dialogue between two shepherds, and I will pause between the speeches given by the two shepherds. The speakers are Cuddy and Colin. Slowly all your secret is had in the empty day. People and sticks go down to the water. How can we be so silent? Only shivers are bred in this land of whistling goats. Father, I have long gazed your whitened face and sides to accost me in dull play. If you and your bush indeed know her, where can my heart's vagrant tides place her? A wish is induced by a sudden change in the wind's decay. Shall we to the water's edge, O Prince? The peons rant in a light fume. Madness will gaze at its reflection. What is this pain come near me? Now I thought my heart would burst, and there, spiked like some cadenza's head, a tiny crippled heart was born. I tell you, good will imitate this. Now we must dip in raw water these few thoughts and fleshy members, so evil may refresh our days. She is descended part way. Now, Father, cut me down in tears. Plant me far in my mother's image to do cold work of books and stones. I need not raise my hand. She burns the flying peoples. To hear its old advice, and spears my heart's two beasts, or cover with its mauves, and I depart unhurt. Meditations of a Parrot. Oh, the rocks and the thimble, the oasis and the paraphrase, oh, the jacket and the roses. All sweetly stood up the sea to me, like blue cornflakes in a white bowl. The girl said, "Watch this." I come from Spain, I said. I was purchased at a fair. She said, "None of us know." There was a house once of dazzling canopies and halls like a keyboard. These the waves tore in pieces. His old wound and all day, Robin Hood, Robin Hood. Mythological poet. The music brought, part one. The music brought us what it seemed we had long desired, but in a form so rarefied there was no emptiness of sensation, as though a fixed delight might persist, like a dear friend walking toward one in a dream. It was the toothless murmuring of ancient willows, who kept their trouble in a stage of music. Without tumult, snow-capped mountains and heart-shaped cathedral windows were contained there, until only infinity remained of beauty. Then, lighter than the air, we rose and packed the picnic basket. But there is beside us, they said, whom we do not sustain, the world of things that rages like a virgin, close to our silken thoughts. It can be touched, they said. It cannot harm. But suddenly their green sides foundered, as though the Virgin beat their airy trellis from within. Over her furious sighs, a new music, monstrous and innocent as an ocean's bright display of teeth, fell on the jousting willows. We are sick, they said. It is a warning we were not meant to understand. Part 2. The mythological poet, his face fabulous and fastidious, accepts beauty before it arrives. The heavenly moment in the heaviness of arrival deplores him. He is merely an ornament, a kind of lewd cloud placed on the horizon. Close to the zoo, acquiescing to dust, candy, perverts, inserted in the panting forest, or openly walking in the great and sullen square, he has eloped with all music and does not care. For isn't there, he says, a final diversion, greater because it can be given, a gift too simple to be despised? And oh, beside the roaring centurion of the lion's hunger, might not child and pervert join hands in the instant of their interest, in the shadow of a million boats, their hunger from loss grown merely a gesture? The Pied Piper. Under the day's crust a half-eaten child, and further sores which eyesight shall reveal, and they live. But what of dark elders, whose touch at nightfall must now be to keep their promise? Misery starches the host's one bed, his hand falls like an axe on her curls. Come in, better that the winter blaze unseen than we two sleep apart, who in old age will often spring apart in dry bed, single once more at the murmur of a Serb revels under the hill, whose children couple as the earth crumbles, in vanity forever going down a sunlit road, for his love was strongest who never loved them at all, and his stiff tune luckiest, laughing not to return. From a diary. Old folks failing, the days grow dim. I walk in the streets and discover the face I have tried most to avoid, dull and solemn its hatred, wide as the shadows of clouds moving over this name to remember, this crime. Holding and never having, not from choice. Poets found out long ago, love is a rose, a hatband, or a flute. But how remove or celebrate any longer this phantom that I know only in love, in love's own borrowed voice? The painter. This is a Sestina. Sitting between the sea and the buildings, he enjoyed painting the sea's portrait. But just as children imagine a prayer is merely silence, he expected his subject to rush up the sand and, seizing a brush, plaster its own portrait on the canvas. So there was never any paint on his canvas, until the people who lived in the buildings put him to work. Try using the brush as a means to an end. Select for a portrait something less angry and large and more subject to a painter's moods, or perhaps to a prayer. How could he explain to them his prayer that nature, not art, might usurp the canvas? He chose his wife for a new subject, making her vast, like ruined buildings, as if forgetting itself, the portrait had expressed itself without a brush. Slightly encouraged, he dipped his brush in the sea, murmuring a heartfelt prayer. My soul, when I paint this next portrait, let it be you who wrecks the canvas. The news spread like wildfire through the buildings. He had gone back to the sea for his subject. Imagine a painter crucified by his subject. Too exhausted even to lift his brush, he provoked some artists leaning from the buildings to malicious mirth. We haven't a prayer now of putting ourselves on canvas or getting the sea to sit for a portrait. Others declared it a self-portrait. Finally, all indications of a subject began to fade, leaving the canvas perfectly white. He put down the brush. At once a howl that was also a prayer arose from the overcrowded buildings. They tossed him the portrait from the tallest of the buildings, and the sea devoured the canvas and the brush, as if his subject had decided to remain a prayer. Jane, Part 1. The President always knew under her lilacs was a liver fading. She wept at her viola, a nigger with the cross seasons. It was Absalom for its strings, but what was its cold heart reading? At last the centaur arrived, he of the next town. Part 2. I hate these black weekend evenings. A wind wrapped in the Caucasus scatters the dinner things and more. The daughters wait as the moon freezes, who reckon the wine they swim in. It was last Thanksgiving she died before the evidence. The world squirmed in its suds. I have entered my house. Do as befits you. Some trees. These are amazing, each joining a neighbor as if speech were a still performance, arranging by chance to meet as far this morning from the world as agreeing with it. You and I are suddenly what the trees try to tell us we are, that their merely being there means something, that soon we may touch, love, explain. And glad not to have invented such comeliness, we are surrounded, a silence already filled with noises, a canvas on which emerges a gathering of smiles, a winter morning. Placed in a puzzling light and moving, our days put on such reticence, these accents seem their own defense. Aors, jealousy, whispered weather reports. In the street we found boxes littered with snow to burn at home. What flower tolling on the waters, you stupefied me. We waxed, gay carnivores, late and alight in the beaded winter. All was ominous, luminous. Beyond the bed's veils, the white walls danced some violent compunction. Promises. We thought then of your dry portals. Bright cornices of eavesdropping palaces, you were painfully stitched to ours, the moon tears up, scoffing at the unrinsed portions. And love's adopted realm flees to water, the coach dissolving in mists. A wish refines the lines around the mouth at these 10-year intervals. It fumed clear air of wars. It desired excess of core in all things. From all things sucked a glossy denial. But look, pale day, we fly hence, to return if sketched in the prophet's silence. Who doubts it is true? Friar Lawrence's cell. What accidental virtues they incur, talking in a quiet corner of the cell, is nothing to the pair of menaced lovers who make the most of each foreshortened minute. Still, in the third act, peace is so near, it seems the curtain will not fall. The soul will at last be free to do its famous dance. The players descend among us to perform beautiful parables out of mind, and angels come to bless us in our love. Although we know such happiness is bound to a loss exclusively theirs, their violent world is more our cluttered city than Verona. And if some evening our love seems almost whole, it is only so chance may make a grander entrance later in the play. Not that suffering is all, but love has very little time for us until it must be leaving. Then, of course, some horrible event is ready to claim the day, and sorrow conquers easily like a germ. If poetry, by tempering these Gothic accidents that at last appear quite sane, might be allowed to ruin us herself, if even beneath the friar's painted windows some girl had suddenly sung, "They are all gone, those famous lovers, those sweet names, lying under the sod so many winters," how happy then we could go home to write their elegies and die to be with them. The Picture of Little J.A. in a Prospect of Flowers. This title is induced by a title of a poem by Marvell, in which the initials are T.C. The title is the same, except for that. It's prefaced by a quotation from Boris Pasternak, which is as follows. He was spoiled from childhood by the future, which he mastered rather early and apparently without great difficulty. Part 1. Darkness falls like a wet sponge, and Dick gives Genevieve a swift punch in the pajamas. Aroint thee, witch. Her tongue from previous ecstasy releases thoughts like little hats. He clapped me first during the eclipse. Afterwards I noted his manner, much altered. But he sending at that time certain handsome jewels, I durst not seem to take offense. In a far recess of summer, monks are playing soccer. Part 2. So far is goodness a mere memory or naming of recent scenes of badness, that even these lives, children, you may pass through to be blessed. So fair does each invent his virtue. And coming from a white world, music will sparkle at the lips of many who are beloved. Then these, as dirty handmaidens to some transparent witch, will dream of a white hero's subtle wooing, and time shall force a gift on each. That beggar to whom you gave no cent striped the night with his strange descant. Part 3. Yet I cannot escape the picture of my small self in that bank of flowers. My head among the blazing phlox seemed a pale and gigantic fungus. I had a hard stare, accepting everything, taking nothing, as if the rolled-up future might stink, as loud as stood the sick moment the shutter clicked. Though I was wrong, still, as the loveliest feelings must soon find words, and these, yes, displace them, so I am not wrong in calling this comic version of myself the true one, for as change is horror, virtue is really stubbornness, and only in the light of lost words can we imagine our rewards. A Dream. This is a prose poem. Gusts of snow creep down the little street in Paris. From the lofts on either side, organs thrust forth the welcome strains of Valse Triste. Choir boys can be heard chanting something inconsequential in Latin. I cross the street and am greeted by a lady dressed in several pastel colors. No, she is wearing a white ball dress, and it has begun to rust. Shall we go? I ask timidly. Of course, she smiles. I've been waiting for hours. Instantly, it becomes a different time of day. The snow has changed to rain. I seize my lady's hand, but our way is blocked by a parade passing down the street at right angles to ours. Not a parade, but a demonstration, perhaps, of the Labor Party. And as they begin to cry, catching sight of us, we become statues for a moment, cleverest moment of all, for the ephemeral scene is suddenly fixed like a ceramic glaze on the underside of our staring, disinterested eyeballs, and who can tell in what strange dream we are moving? but once again all becomes heated, painful, arbitrary, and we embrace on an escalator bearing us, it seems, right up into the heart of one of the glittering pipe organs, streaming from which the hysterical sighing of the March from Tannhäuser threatens at every moment to capsize us. "You said you would go there with me," I shout. Is she offended, perhaps? No? Yes? "We can't," her lips form these words, "unless—" An awful boredom seizes her. Turning, she marches up the little ladder into the belly of the huge beast, and too terrible has become the swollen, tortured melody I thought was within me, trying to escape. And were it not that I am stationed like a beacon above that Paris of dark glass and frozen steel, which resembles the top of an enormous railway terminal, that ignorant music would no doubt be successful in battering apart my childhood on the eternal stones of this hard-hearted city. Part 1. I observe the contempt, citizens, that gladly I inspire in your chests. Nor shall I say you do not know the real me. You do. In my passing, as you say, from A to B, to C and back to A, there is some humor but no splendor. There is beauty only in the thought of travel from place to place. To honor my merely going or dryly becoming is a vice. But without my simple vice, there'd be no you, no happiness, no walks. I hear you stare and mean to say, last fall he was here, this fall he is back. What does he mean to do, shambling from mighty experience to small and perfect sorrows? And yet he cannot make a style of constant change. Did I say I observe? I weep, citizens. In my ramblings I have not found things the same, for seasons too forget. The pheasant flirts his tail across a scene completely new and cold, but I have seen your haggard forms rise in the filling tide of gray daylight, Paul and Francesca, drawn around my trail. I weep. You cannot make a style of standing there. Part 2. Our time, my dear ones, does not come again. Only in the giant salon of days, young hours, fresh from winter walks about the serried gardens, know in the long mirror how endlessly free they are, if to occur could ever be their wish. And once as I lay half awake, disturbed and impressed by one still kept in conversations, though fled beyond advantage, she did come back to hurt me like a flower, with choruses of hours, bearing her scented gifts and ways, all real beyond the touch of my poor hand. And as I danced, I thought I was a part of time, and saw the usefulness and joy of singleness, of unwillingness to return. The grapevine. Of who we and all they are, you all now know. But you know, after they began to find us out, we grew, before they died thinking us the causes of their acts. Now we'll not know the truth of some still at the piano, though they often date from us, causing these changes we think we are. We don't care, though, all so tall up there in young air, but things get darker as we move to ask them, whom must we get to know, to die, so you live and we know? Why we forget dreams. Part 1. Through the half-open door came a sound of April. But I'm sad, said the tenor. Oh, unwisely the spring heaps up its dangerous architecture. Who expects wisdom from light-headed birds moving through a forest of constant desires, a world continually budding and fading, where only death flowers and is exact, and the season of love will never happen. The sun went out. The noise of his crying fell across the ear like an icy rain. Who can make his sorrow or his happiness last, or make of their changing a beautiful thing? Part 2. Now, he said, it is all over. Only someday, crossing a street or innocently pulling on our gloves, the will of an unseen lover will stare us into silence. In the sky Palladian and the waving tips of the willow, his sudden song will confound us, for it shall be noiseless and wordless, the sky of his coming dreamless, and we the ghosts of which a dreamer takes possession. So today the swans in the public gardens carry his sentence from shore to shore, yet we sit in the sun with our legs dangling, and my knowledge black and cold beneath. To move, he said, in that definition peaceful as swans, as in a poem love is forgotten, and in a dream the poem is lost in a desert of contexts, so motion is our cure, but till he names us, love can be only waking to each other. I to the blinding nowhere of your limbs, you to the sad spring lost in my stammerings. Illustration, Part 1. A novice was sitting on a cornice high over the city. Angels combined their prayers with those of the police, begging her to come off it. One lady promised to be her friend. I do not want a friend, she said. A mother offered her some nylons stripped from her very legs. Others brought little offerings of fruit and candy, the blind man all his flowers. If any could be called successful, these were. For that the scene should be a ceremony was what she wanted. I desire monuments, she said. I want to move figuratively, as waves caress the thoughtless shore. You people, I know, will offer me every good thing I do not want, but please remember, I died accepting them. With that, the wind unpinned her bulky robes, and naked as a roc's egg, she drifted softly downward, out of the angel's tenderness in the minds of men. Part 2. Much that is beautiful must be discarded, so that we may resemble a taller impression of ourselves. Moths climb in the flame, alas, that wish only to be the flame. They do not lessen our stature. We twinkle under the weight of indiscretions. But how could we tell that of the truth we know, she was the somber vestment? For that night, rockets sighed elegantly over the city, and there was feasting. There is so much in that moment, so many attitudes toward that flame. We might have sailed from earth, watching her glide aloft in her peplum of bright leaves. But she, of course, was only an effigy of indifference, or a miracle not meant for us, as the leaves are not winter's because it is the end.
Thanks for listening. 92nd Street Y Unterberg Poetry Center webcasts and access to our archive are made possible by the generous support of the Aoriflex Foundation. For more information on 92nd Street Y and all our programs, please visit us on the web at 92y.org. This program is copyright 1952 by 92nd Street Y.